The gunshot that shattered the evening silence sent Willa Everett's horse rearing backward, and before she could grab the saddle horn, she was flying through the air toward the churning waters of the Weber River below. The impact knocked every bit of air from her lungs. Cold mountain water flooded over her head as the current dragged her downstream, her heavy skirts tangling around her legs like iron chains. She fought against the fabric, against the relentless pull of the river, swollen from spring snowmelt, her lungs burning as she broke the surface only to be dragged under again. The world became a blur of gray sky and darker water, the roar filling her ears until she thought she might drown in the sound alone before the water claimed her. Her shoulders slammed against a rock and she gasped, choking on river water that tasted of minerals and snowmelt. The current spun her around and she caught a glimpse of the rocky shore, so close but impossibly far. Her arms were growing heavy, her movements sluggish in the freezing water. The April afternoon that had seemed so pleasant an hour ago now felt like a lifetime away. Then strong hands grabbed her arm, fingers digging into her flesh with desperate strength. She was being pulled, dragged through the shallower water near the bank, her knees scraping against smooth river stones. She collapsed on the shore, coughing up water, her whole body shaking so violently she could barely draw breath. "Easy now," a deep voice said above her. "Get it all out." Willa coughed until her ribs ached, until she could finally draw a full breath that did not taste of the river. She looked up through strands of dark hair plastered across her face and saw him. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hair the color of wheat and eyes that held concern she had not seen directed at her in longer than she cared to remember. Water dripped from his clothes, darkening the fabric of his shirt and trousers. "You jumped in after me," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "Could not very well let you drown," he said, already shrugging out of his heavy coat. It was dark brown leather, worn but well maintained, and he wrapped it around her shoulders without ceremony. The warmth that clung to the interior made her gasp. "What happened up there?" "Gunshot," she said, pulling the coat tighter. Even through her violent shaking, she could smell leather and sage and something distinctly masculine. "Spooked my horse. I do not know who fired or why." The cowboy's jaw tightened and he looked upstream, his hand moving to rest on the revolver at his hip. "You hurt anywhere besides being half frozen?" "I think I am mostly intact," Willa said, though her shoulder throbbed where she had hit the rock. She pushed herself to sitting, water streaming from her dress to pool on the stones beneath her. The gray fabric clung to her like a second skin, and she was suddenly aware of how improper this all was, sitting on a riverbank with a strange man while wearing a soaked dress. But propriety seemed rather insignificant when she had nearly drowned. "Nathan Xerxes," the cowboy said, offering his hand. "I work at the Reynolds Ranch about 3 miles west of Alta." "Willa Everett," she replied, placing her cold hand in his warm one. His grip was firm, calloused, the hand of a man who worked for his living. "I teach at the schoolhouse in Alta." "The new teacher," Nathan said, recognition lighting his features. "Heard you arrived from back east about 2 months ago." "Boston," Willa confirmed, then another violent shiver ran through her. The sun was starting to sink lower toward the mountains, and the temperature was dropping with it. April in the Utah Territory was unpredictable at best, treacherous at worst. Nathan made a decision quickly. "My horse is just through those trees. We need to get you somewhere warm before hypothermia sets in. The Reynolds Ranch is closer than town." "I cannot impose," Willa started to protest, but Nathan was already helping her to her feet. "You can and you will," he said firmly. "No arguments. You are shaking so hard I can hear your teeth rattling from here." He was right. Willa could barely stand, her legs weak from fighting the current and from the cold that seemed to have settled into her very bones. Nathan kept one hand on her elbow, steadying her as they made their way through the cottonwood trees that lined the river. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding, stood ground-tied where he had left it, ears pricked forward at their approach. "Can you ride?" Nathan asked. "I think so," Willa said, though she was not entirely certain. Her hands were numb, and her coordination was suffering. Nathan did not look convinced either. He swung up into the saddle first, then reached down for her. "Give me your hand. I will pull you up behind me." It took 2 attempts, with Willa's waterlogged skirts fighting her every step of the way, but finally she was seated behind Nathan, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. The coat he had given her was caught between them, but it still provided some warmth. Nathan urged the horse into an easy lope, fast enough to cover ground, but not so fast that Willa might lose her seat. She rested her cheek against his back, too cold and exhausted to care about propriety anymore. Through his damp shirt, she could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body. It was oddly comforting, that steadiness, when everything else in the past hour had been chaos. "How did you happen to be there?" she asked, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Mending fence line along the river," Nathan replied. "Heard the gunshot, then heard the splash. Got there just in time to see you go under." "Thank you," Willa said quietly, "for jumping in. You could have drowned too." "But we did not," Nathan said simply. "That is what matters." The Reynolds ranch came into view as they crested a small rise. It was a substantial operation, with a large main house, several barns, and numerous corrals. Cattle dotted the hillsides, dark shapes against the green spring grass. Nathan guided his horse straight to the main house, a solid structure built of logs with a stone chimney from which smoke curled invitingly. A woman in her 50s emerged onto the porch as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene, Willa's dripping dress and bedraggled appearance. "Nathan? What on earth?" she exclaimed. "Miss Everett fell in the river," Nathan said, dismounting quickly before reaching up to help Willa down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. "She needs to get warm and dry. Can you help her, Mrs. Reynolds?" Of course," the older woman said, hurrying down the steps. She took one of Willa's arms while Nathan supported the other, and together they got her into the house. The warmth inside was so intense after the cold that Willa gasped. "Bring her to the guest room," Mrs. Reynolds instructed. "I will get hot water and some dry clothes. Nathan, get yourself dried off too before you catch your death." The guest room was small but comfortable, with a quilt-covered bed and a washstand. Mrs. Reynolds shooed Nathan out and helped Willa peel off the sodden dress, the layers of petticoats, the soaked undergarments. Willa's fingers were too numb and uncoordinated to manage the buttons and laces herself. "You poor dear," Mrs. Reynolds said as she worked. "What a terrible fright you must have had." "Nathan saved my life," Willa said through chattering teeth. "I would have drowned if he had not pulled me out." "That sounds like Nathan," Mrs. Reynolds said with obvious affection. "He has been working here for 3 years now. Best hand my husband has ever hired. Good man, through and through." She wrapped Willa in a thick robe that was far too large for her. "Now, you sit here by the fire. I will bring you some hot tea and find you something to wear." Left alone, Willa sank into the chair near the small fireplace in the room. Someone, probably Nathan, had already laid and lit a fire. She held her hands toward the flames, watching them shake. The reality of how close she had come to dying was starting to sink in, making her feel hollow and strange. Mrs. Reynolds returned with tea that was heavily sweetened and nearly too hot to drink, but Willa drank it anyway, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. The older woman also brought a simple calico dress in a faded blue pattern. "It was my daughter's," she explained. "She married and moved to California last year. I think you are about the same size." The dress fit reasonably well, though it was a bit loose in the waist and short enough to show Willa's ankles. Mrs. Reynolds also provided stockings and a pair of soft shoes. By the time Willa was dressed, she had finally stopped shaking quite so violently. "Come out to the kitchen," Mrs. Reynolds said. "I have stew on the stove, and you need something hot in your stomach. Nathan is already out there." The kitchen was the heart of the house, with a massive iron stove and a long wooden table. Nathan sat at one end, his hair damp but combed, wearing a dry shirt. He stood when Willa entered. "You look better," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Still pale, but better." "I feel almost human again," Willa admitted, taking the chair Mrs. Reynolds indicated. The older woman ladled stew into bowls, thick with vegetables and chunks of beef, and set them on the table along with fresh bread. "Now you both eat," she commanded, "and tell me exactly what happened." Between bites of stew that tasted better than anything Willa could remember eating, they explained. The gunshot, the horse rearing, the fall into the river, Nathan's rescue. Mrs. Reynolds listened with growing concern. "Someone fired a gun near you deliberately?" she asked when they finished. "I do not know if it was deliberate," Willa said. "Perhaps someone was hunting and did not realize I was there." Nathan frowned. "Maybe, but you are not exactly quiet on horseback. Anyone hunting should have known someone was in the area. "Do you have any enemies, dear?" Mrs. Reynolds asked gently. Willa hesitated. She had not told anyone in Alta the real reason she had left Boston, had let them believe she simply wanted adventure in the West. But sitting in this warm kitchen, these people having likely saved her life, the truth seemed to want to come out. "I left Boston because I refused a marriage proposal," she said slowly. "From a man named Chester Hadley. He is the son of one of Boston's most prominent families. He did not take the rejection well." Nathan's expression darkened. "How not well?" "He told me I would regret it, that I could not escape him. But surely he would not follow me all the way to Utah Territory," Willa said, though even as she spoke the words, doubt crept in. Chester had been frightening in his intensity, his certainty that she would eventually be his. "Men have done worse for less reason," Nathan said grimly. "Tomorrow I will ride into Alta with you, make sure you get home safely, and maybe have a word with the sheriff." "I could not ask you to do that," Willa protested. "You are not asking, I am offering," Nathan said, his blue eyes steady on hers. "Someone fired that shot, whether it was intentional or not. Until we know for certain, you should not be riding alone." Mrs. Reynolds nodded approvingly. "Nathan is right. You will stay here tonight, get a proper night's rest. In the morning, Nathan can escort you back to town." Willa wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could take care of herself. But the truth was, she was exhausted and still chilled to her core despite the warm clothes and hot food. The thought of riding back to Alta alone in the dark held no appeal whatsoever. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I am grateful for your kindness." "Nonsense," Mrs. Reynolds said briskly. "It is what any decent person would do. Now, finish your stew. You need your strength." After dinner, Mrs. Reynolds showed Willa back to the guest room. Someone had changed the linens and added extra blankets to the bed. A fire crackled cheerfully in the small fireplace. "Sleep well, dear," Mrs. Reynolds said. "If you need anything in the night, our room is just down the hall." Alone, Willa climbed into the bed and pulled the quilts up to her chin. Her body ached in a dozen places, bruises from the rocks and the violence of the river making themselves known. But she was alive and warm and safe because of Nathan. She found herself thinking about him as she drifted towards sleep, the way he had not hesitated to jump into the river, the steady certainty in his voice when he said they needed to get her warm, the feel of his back against her cheek during the ride, solid and reassuring. She had known him for perhaps 3 hours total, and yet she already felt she could trust him in a way she had trusted very few people in her life. Sleep came eventually, though her dreams were filled with rushing water and the echo of gunshots. Morning arrived with sunlight streaming through the guest room window. Willa woke slowly, disoriented for a moment, before memory returned. The river. Nathan. The Reynolds Ranch. She sat up, wincing at the soreness in her muscles, and found that someone had left a pitcher of fresh water on the washstand, along with a towel. When she emerged from the guest room, dressed again in the borrowed calico dress since her own was still wet, she found Nathan and Mr. Reynolds at the kitchen table. Mr. Reynolds was an older man, with gray in his beard and kind eyes that reminded Willa of her father. "Good morning, Miss Everett," he said. "I hope you slept well. Nathan has been telling me about your ordeal yesterday." "As well as could be expected," Willa said. "Thank you again for your hospitality." "Martha has gone to tend the chickens, but she left breakfast warming," Mr. Reynolds said, gesturing to the stove. "Help yourself. Nathan says he's riding into Alta with you this morning." "If Miss Everett does not object," Nathan said, looking at her. "I would appreciate the company," Willa admitted, "though I hate to take you away from your work." "Jacob and the other hands can manage for a morning," Mr. Reynolds said. "Nathan is right to see you safely home, and to speak with Sheriff Coleman about that gunshot." They ate breakfast together, eggs and bacon, and more of the good bread from the night before. Mrs. Reynolds returned as they were finishing and packed food for their journey, insisting they take it. She also wrapped Willa's dried dress in paper, though it would need proper laundering to be truly clean again. Nathan saddled 2 horses, his bay gelding and a gentle gray mare. The morning was bright and clear, the mountains standing sharp against the blue sky. Birds sang in the cottonwoods, and the air smelled of sage and new grass. It was hard to believe that less than 24 hours ago, Willa had nearly drowned in the river she could hear rushing in the distance. They rode at an easy pace toward Alta. The town was not large, perhaps 300 people, but it had grown quickly with the mining operations in the nearby canyons. Willa had taken the teaching position because it offered escape from Boston, from Chester, from a life she had not wanted. She had expected the West to be rough and challenging, but she had not expected to find it quite so dangerous, quite so quickly. "Tell me about him," Nathan said after they had ridden for a while. "This Chester Hadley." Willa was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts. "He is wealthy, handsome by conventional standards, educated, on the surface everything a woman is supposed to want. But underneath, he is controlling, possessive. He courted me for 6 months, and in that time, he systematically tried to isolate me from my friends, to make me dependent on him. When I refused his proposal, he became angry in a way that frightened me. He said I belonged to him, that I had no right to refuse." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Did he hurt you?" "Not physically, but his eyes when he looked at me that last time, there was something cold in them. My father suggested I consider a position elsewhere, somewhere far away. When the letter came from the school board in Alta, it seemed like fate." She glanced at Nathan. "Do you think I am running away?" "I think you are surviving," Nathan said simply. "There is no shame in removing yourself from a bad situation. That is wisdom, not cowardice." His words settled something uneasy in Willa's chest. She had wondered, late at night, if she was being foolish, if she had overreacted. But Nathan's certainty made her feel less alone with the decision. "What brought you to the Reynolds Ranch?" she asked, wanting to shift the conversation away from herself. "Drifting, mostly," Nathan said. "I grew up in Missouri, but after the war, home did not feel like home anymore. Spent a few years moving from place to place, working cattle drives, trying to figure out where I belonged. Ended up in Alta 3 years ago, and found work with Mr. Reynolds. He is a good man, treats his workers fairly. It felt right to stay." "Do you miss Missouri?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "I miss what it was before the war. My parents both passed during those years. My brother died at Shiloh. There is nothing left there for me now, except ghosts." "I am sorry," Willa said softly. She had been young during the war, barely aware of it beyond the worried conversations of adults and the lists of dead that appeared in the newspapers. But she knew what loss looked like, and she saw it now in the set of Nathan's shoulders. "It was a long time ago," Nathan said, though his voice suggested otherwise. "You learned to carry it." They rode in companionable silence for a while. The road into Alta wound through hills covered with scrub oak and juniper, past streams still running high with snowmelt. It was beautiful country, so different from the manicured parks and crowded streets of Boston. Willa found she preferred it. This wild openness where the sky stretched forever. Alta appeared ahead, a collection of wooden buildings clustered along the main street. There was the general store, the saloon, the church with its white steeple, and the small schoolhouse where Willa taught 20 students ranging in age from 6 to 14. Her living quarters were in a small house behind the school, provided by the school board. Nathan rode directly to the sheriff's office, a squat building with bars on the windows. Sheriff Coleman was outside, sweeping the boardwalk. He looked up as they approached, his weathered face creasing with curiosity. "Morning, Nathan. Miss Everett," he said. "What brings you two by?" They dismounted and Nathan explained what had happened, the gunshot and Willa's fall into the river. The sheriff's expression grew serious as he listened. "You did not see anyone?" he asked Willa. "No. The shot came from somewhere upstream, but I was focused on controlling my horse. Then I was in the water." Sheriff Coleman scratched his jaw thoughtfully. "Could have been someone hunting, could have been an accident. But given what you have told me about this Boston fellow, I will keep an eye out. Stranger comes to town asking about you, I will know about it." He looked at Nathan. "Appreciate you bringing this to my attention, and for pulling the school teacher out of the river. Town needs her." "Anyone would have done the same," Nathan said. "Maybe," the sheriff said. "But you were the one who did it. Miss Everett, you keep your doors locked at night, and if anything else strange happens, you come tell me right away." "I will," Willa promised. Nathan insisted on walking her to the schoolhouse, leading both horses. The main street was busy with mid-morning activity, and Willa was aware of curious looks from the townspeople. By evening, everyone would know that the school teacher had fallen in the river, and Nathan Xerxes had rescued her. The gossip mill in a small town moved faster than any telegraph. Her little house behind the school looked exactly as she had left it yesterday morning, but it felt different somehow. Less secure. She found herself looking over her shoulder as she unlocked the door. "Would you like me to check inside?" Nathan offered. "Please," Willa said, grateful he had suggested it. Nathan did a thorough search of the two rooms, checking the windows and even looking under the bed. "Everything looks secure," he reported, "but the sheriff is right. Keep your doors locked." "I will." Willa stood in the doorway, suddenly not wanting him to leave, which was ridiculous. She barely knew this man. "Thank you, Nathan, for everything. I owe you my life." "You do not owe me anything," Nathan said, "but I would like to check on you in a few days, make sure you are doing all right, if that would be acceptable." "I would like that," Willa said, and was surprised to realize how much she meant it. Nathan tipped his hat to her and mounted his horse. Willa watched him ride away, something warm unfurling in her chest that had nothing to do with the morning sun. The next few days passed quietly. Willa taught her students, prepared lessons, and tried not to jump at every unexpected sound. No more mysterious gunshots rang out. No strangers appeared asking questions about her. She began to relax, to think perhaps it had been just an unfortunate accident after all. But she found herself thinking about Nathan with surprising frequency. The way he had not hesitated to help her, the steady kindness in his eyes, the feel of his coat around her shoulders, warm and smelling of leather and sage. 4 days after her rescue, he appeared at the schoolhouse just as she was dismissing her students for the day. The children erupted in excited chatter at the sight of the cowboy on the big bay horse, and Nathan bore their attention with patient good humor, answering questions about his horse and the cattle ranch. When the last student had finally run off toward home, Nathan dismounted and approached the schoolhouse steps where Willa stood. "Afternoon, Miss Everett," he said. "I promised I would check on you." "Please call me Willa," she said. "After you saved my life, I think we can dispense with excessive formality." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Willa, then. And I am Nathan, not Mr. Xerxes." "How are things at the ranch?" Willa asked. "Busy. Spring is always hectic, with the cattle and the new calves. But I told Mr. Reynolds I needed to ride into town today." He hesitated. "I have been thinking about you, wondering if you were all right." "I am well," Willa said. "Nothing else strange has happened. I am beginning to think it was just an accident after all." "Maybe," Nathan said, though he did not sound entirely convinced. "But I am glad you are being careful." He shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncertain in a way that was endearing. "I was wondering, if you were not otherwise engaged, perhaps you might like to have supper with me. There is a decent restaurant at the hotel. Nothing fancy, but the food is good." Willa's heart did an odd little flip in her chest. "I would like that very much." Nathan's face broke into a genuine smile, and Willa realized she had not seen him really smile before. It transformed him, made him look younger and less burdened. "Tonight, I could call for you at 6. "Tonight would be perfect," Willa agreed. She spent the rest of the afternoon in a flutter of nervous energy, changing her dress 3 times before settling on a dark green one that she thought brought out her eyes. She brushed her hair until it shone and pinned it up in a style that was fashionable but not too elaborate. It felt absurd to be so nervous about dinner with a man, but her hands trembled slightly as she fastened her earrings. Nathan arrived precisely at 6, cleaned up and wearing what were clearly his good clothes. He offered his arm, and they walked together to the hotel, making conversation about small things, the weather and the school and the ranch. But underneath the ordinary words, Willa was intensely aware of him, the warmth of his arm under her hand, the way he shortened his stride to match hers. The restaurant was indeed nothing fancy, just a room off the hotel lobby with a dozen tables covered in simple white cloths. But it was clean and welcoming, and the smells coming from the kitchen made Willa's stomach rumble in anticipation. They ordered chicken and potatoes and vegetables, and talked while they waited for the food. The conversation came easily, more easily than Willa would have expected. Nathan told her about growing up in Missouri, about learning to ride and rope from his father, about the cattle drives that had brought him west. Willa talked about Boston, about her work as a teacher, carefully editing around the parts about Chester. "Why teaching?" Nathan asked over the meal. "You could have done other things." "I like children," Willa said simply. "And I believe education matters. My mother was a teacher before she married my father. She taught me that knowledge is power, especially for women. We are so often told we are not capable of learning, that our minds are inferior. Every girl I teach to read and write and think critically is a small rebellion against that injustice." Nathan listened intently, his blue eyes focused on her with an attention that made her feel seen in a way she rarely experienced. "That is important work," he said, "more important than most people probably appreciate." "Do you read?" Willa asked. "Some. Never had much formal schooling, but my mother taught me letters and numbers before she died. I have been working my way through Mr. Reynolds' library when I have time. He has a lot of books." "What are you reading now?" "A collection of Shakespeare's plays. I am not sure I understand all of it, but I like the language, the way the words fit together." He looked almost embarrassed. "That probably sounds strange." "It does not sound strange at all," Willa said warmly. "It sounds like you appreciate beauty, which is never strange. Would you like me to lend you some books? I brought quite a collection with me from Boston." "I would like that," Nathan said, and the smile he gave her made her feel warm all over. After dinner, Nathan walked her home through the twilight. The spring evening was cool but pleasant, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. They walked slowly, neither seeming eager to end the evening. At her door, Nathan paused. "I enjoyed tonight, Willa." "So did I," she said honestly. "Very much. May I call on you again?" "I would be disappointed if you did not," Willa said. Nathan's smile was bright even in the dim light. "Sunday, then? I could borrow Mr. Reynolds' buggy, take you on a picnic if the weather holds." "That sounds wonderful." He tipped his hat to her, and for a moment, Willa thought he might kiss her, but he simply squeezed her hand gently before mounting his horse and riding away into the darkness. Willa stood in her doorway, watching until he disappeared from sight, her hand tingling where he had touched it. Sunday dawned clear and beautiful. Nathan arrived at noon with the Reynolds' buggy and a basket of food that Mrs. Reynolds had helped him pack. They drove out of town, following a road that wound up into the foothills where wildflowers were just beginning to bloom. Nathan found a spot near a small creek with cottonwood trees providing shade and the mountains rising majestically in the background. He spread a blanket on the grass and they unpacked the basket, which proved to contain fried chicken, fresh bread, cheese, apples, and even a jar of lemonade. "Mrs. Reynolds went all out," Willa said, impressed. "She likes you," Nathan said. "She kept asking me questions about you all week. I think she is hoping we will court." The directness of his words made Willa's cheeks warm. "And what do you hope?" Nathan met her eyes steadily. "I hope we will court, if you are willing. I know I am just a ranch hand, and you are educated and come from a good family. But I would like the chance to know you better, Willa, to see if what I am feeling might grow into something more." Willa's heart was beating fast. "What are you feeling?" "Like the ground shifted under me when I pulled you out of that river," Nathan said quietly. "Like I have been looking for something, without knowing what it was, and suddenly there you were. I know it has only been a week. I know I might be speaking too soon, but I am not a man who plays games or hides what he wants, and I want to court you properly if you will have me." No one had ever spoken to Willa with such honest vulnerability before. Chester had been all smooth words and calculated charm, but Nathan was offering her something real and unpolished and true. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I would like to court you, Nathan." His smile could have lit up the whole valley. They ate their picnic lunch and talked for hours, discovering shared opinions on books and philosophy, laughing at stories from their childhoods. Nathan told her about the ranch, about the cattle and horses he cared for, about his dreams of one day having his own small spread. Willa talked about her students, about the challenges and joys of teaching, about her hope to eventually start a lending library in Alta. As the afternoon wore on, they fell into comfortable silences punctuated by easy conversation. Nathan picked wildflowers and wove them into a small bouquet for Willa. She taught him a complicated word game her mother used to play. They were learning each other, slowly and carefully, building something that felt solid and good. On the drive back to Alta, Nathan reached over and took Willa's hand. She laced her fingers through his, marveling at how natural it felt, how right. The next weeks fell into a pattern that Willa came to treasure. Nathan would ride into town twice a week, on Wednesdays after school and on Sundays. They would have dinner together or go for walks, or simply sit on Willa's small porch and talk while the sun set. He borrowed books from her collection and they discussed them earnestly. She visited the Reynolds ranch and helped Mrs. Reynolds with her garden, learning about plants that thrived in this high mountain climate. The people of Alta grew accustomed to seeing them together. the schoolteacher, and the cowboy. Some whispered that it was too fast, too sudden, but most approved. Nathan was respected in town, known as an honest and hard-working man, and Willa had quickly become beloved for her dedication to the children. It was during her 5th week in Alta, on a Wednesday evening when Nathan came to call, that everything changed. They were sitting on her porch, watching the stars emerge, when a man on a fine horse rode up the main street. Even in the dim light, Willa recognized him immediately. The set of his shoulders, the expensive cut of his clothes, the arrogant tilt of his head. Chester Hadley had found her. Willa went cold all over, her hand tightening convulsively on Nathan's. "That is him," she whispered. "That is Chester." Nathan was on his feet immediately, moving to place himself between Willa and the approaching rider. Chester dismounted in front of the schoolhouse, tying his horse with movements that spoke of barely controlled anger. "Willa," he called, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air, "I have come a very long way to find you." "You should not have come at all," Willa said, standing but staying behind Nathan. "I told you in Boston that I did not want to marry you. That has not changed." Chester's eyes narrowed as he took in Nathan's protective stance. "And who is this? Some common cowboy you have taken up with? Really, Willa, I thought you had better taste." "You need to leave," Nathan said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. "Miss Everett has made her feelings clear." "This does not concern you," Chester said dismissively. "Willa and I have an understanding." "We do not," Willa said firmly, stepping forward despite Nathan's attempt to keep her behind him. "We never did, Chester. I rejected your proposal. I left Boston to escape your harassment. If you had any decency at all, you would respect my decision and leave." "Escape?" Chester laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is that what you told yourself, that you were escaping? You are mine, Willa. You have been mine since the moment we met. This ridiculous flight to the wilderness changes nothing." "I am not yours," Willa said, her voice shaking with anger now rather than fear. "I am not property to be owned. I am a person with my own will, and I choose not to be with you." Chester took a step forward, and Nathan moved to block him. "I will not ask you again to leave," Nathan said. "But if you do not go peacefully, I will fetch the sheriff and have you removed." "The sheriff?" Chester's smile was ugly. "I doubt the law here cares much about a domestic dispute between a man and his intended." "Willa is not your intended," Nathan said, and now there was real danger in his voice. "She has told you no. That is the end of the discussion." Chester's hand moved toward his coat, and Nathan reacted instantly, his own hand dropping to his revolver. "Do not," Nathan said quietly. "Whatever you are reaching for, it will not end well for you." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Chester slowly raised his empty hands. "You are making a mistake, Willa," he said, his eyes fixed on her. "I came all this way to give you one more chance, to bring you home where you belong." "This is my home now," Willa said, "and you are not welcome here. Please leave, Chester. There is nothing for you in Alta." Chester's face twisted with rage and something darker. "You will regret this. Both of you. I do not forget slights, and I do not forgive them." He mounted his horse with jerky movements and wheeled the animal around, spurring it into a gallop back down the main street. They watched until he disappeared into the darkness. Willa found she was shaking, not from cold this time, but from delayed reaction. Nathan pulled her into his arms, and she pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his familiar scent of leather and sage. "I was afraid," she admitted. "For a moment there, I thought he might try to hurt you." "I would not have let him," Nathan said, his arms tightening around her. "No one is going to hurt you, Willa, not while I am here." But even as he said it, unease crept through both of them. Chester had found her once. He could find her again. And the look in his eyes when he rode away had been filled with malice. Nathan refused to leave that night, instead settling himself on Willa's porch with his rifle across his knees. In the morning, they went together to find Sheriff Coleman and tell him about Chester's arrival and threats. The sheriff took notes and promised to keep watch, but he was honest about the limitations. "Unless he actually tries something, there is not much I can do. I can ask him to leave town, but I cannot force him without cause. And if he is staying at the hotel or one of the boarding houses, he has as much right to be here as anyone." "He said he does not forgive slights," Willa said. "He was talking about both of us. I think Nathan might be in danger too." "I can handle myself," Nathan said, but his expression was grim. Over the next few days, Chester made his presence in Alta abundantly clear. He took a room at the hotel. He made a point of attending the church service on Sunday, sitting where Willa could not help but see him. He struck up conversations with townspeople, presenting himself as a concerned friend from Boston who had traveled all this way to check on dear Miss Everett. Some people bought his act. Others, who knew Willa better, were less convinced. But his presence was like a shadow over everything, turning what had been a peaceful town into something tense and watchful. Nathan stayed close to Willa as much as his work allowed. Mr. Reynolds, understanding the situation, gave him more flexibility to ride into town. Nathan would walk Willa home from school, stay with her until dark, then reluctantly ride back to the ranch. It was late on a Thursday night, 2 weeks after Chester's arrival, when things came to a head. Nathan was at the ranch, asleep in the bunkhouse, when he was jolted awake by pounding on the door. Jacob, one of the other ranch hands, stood there with a lantern. "Fire in town," he said breathlessly. "Someone just rode by to raise the alarm. The schoolhouse is burning." Nathan was on his horse in minutes, riding hard through the darkness toward Alta. He could see the glow of flames against the night sky long before he reached the town. His heart was in his throat, fear making it hard to breathe. Willa's house was behind the schoolhouse, if the fire spread. Half the town was already there when he arrived, forming bucket brigades from the nearest well. The schoolhouse was fully engulfed, flames leaping from the windows and through the roof. But Willa's house was still untouched, and Nathan could see her standing at a safe distance with some of the other townspeople, her face illuminated by the terrible orange light. Relief flooded through him so intensely he felt dizzy. He dismounted and pushed through the crowd to reach her side. Willa turned and saw him, and her face crumpled. He pulled her into his arms, and she clung to him, shaking. "I woke up and smelled smoke," she said against his chest. "The whole schoolhouse was already burning. Nathan, all the books, the children's work, everything is gone." "But you are safe," Nathan said fiercely. "That is all that matters." The townspeople fought the fire all night, but the schoolhouse was a total loss. By dawn, only a charred skeleton remained, smoke still rising from the ruins. Willa stood looking at the destruction, tears streaming down her face. A year's worth of work, gone in one night. Sheriff Coleman examined the scene carefully as the sun rose. He found what he was looking for near the back of the building, a broken lantern that smelled of kerosene. "This was deliberate," he announced grimly. "Someone set this fire on purpose." Willa's eyes went immediately to the hotel, where Chester had taken a room. Nathan followed her gaze and felt cold fury settle in his gut. "I will talk to Mr. Hadley," Sheriff Coleman said, "but without proof, there is little I can do beyond asking questions." Chester, when questioned, had an alibi. He had been at the saloon until past midnight, playing cards with several other men, who reluctantly confirmed his story. The bartender remembered serving him. He could not have set the fire, at least not personally. But Nathan noticed that one of the men who alibied Chester was a drifter who had recently arrived in town, and that drifter disappeared the same day the sheriff started asking questions, riding out before dawn and not coming back. The school board held an emergency meeting. Without a building, there could be no school. Willa was devastated, feeling that she had failed her students. But the community rallied around her. The church offered space for classes until a new schoolhouse could be built. Families donated books to replace those lost in the fire. Within a week, Willa was teaching again, grateful but still shaken. Nathan could see the toll the stress was taking on her. She jumped at unexpected sounds. She rarely smiled anymore. Chester's continued presence in town was like a weight pressing down on her, and she grew thin and pale with the strain. It was Mrs. Reynolds who proposed a solution. "Let her stay here," she said to Nathan one evening at the ranch. "The house behind the schoolhouse is gone anyway. She could have the guest room, be part of our household, at least until we know she is safe." Nathan brought the proposal to Willa, expecting her to refuse out of propriety. But she surprised him by accepting immediately, relief flooding her features at the thought of not being alone and vulnerable in town. She moved to the Reynolds ranch the next day, bringing her few salvage possessions. Mrs. Reynolds fussed over her like a mother hen, feeding her hearty meals and making sure she rested. Mr. Reynolds treated her like the daughter they had lost to distance, including her in dinner conversations and asking her opinion on ranch matters. And Nathan found himself seeing Willa every day now, morning and evening. They would walk together in the coolness after sunset, talking about everything and nothing. He taught her to ride better, moving beyond the basic side saddle skills she had learned back east to a more practical Western style. She read to him in the evenings, books borrowed from Mr. Reynolds' library, and they would discuss the stories late into the night. Love, which had been growing steadily between them, deepened into something profound. Nathan found himself thinking of a future that included Willa in every part of it. And when he looked at her, he saw the same thoughts reflected in her eyes. But Chester was still in Alta, a constant threat hanging over their happiness. He made no more overt moves, but his presence alone was disturbing. He would appear wherever Willa happened to be in town, always at a distance, always watching. It was psychological warfare, and it was working. Finally, Nathan decided enough was enough. On a Saturday morning, he rode into Alta and went directly to the hotel. He found Chester in the restaurant, eating a late breakfast. "We need to talk," Nathan said without preamble. Chester looked up, a slight smile playing on his lips. "The cowboy. Come to defend your lady's honor? Come to ask you directly to leave town," Nathan said. "You are not wanted here, by Willa or anyone else. Whatever you thought you would accomplish by coming here, it has failed. She is not going back to Boston with you. She is never going to marry you. Accept it and move on with your life." "Who are you to tell me what to accept?" Chester asked, his smile fading. "Some dirt-poor ranch hand who will never amount to anything? Willa deserves better than a life of poverty and hard work in this God-forsaken wilderness." "Willa deserves to make her own choices," Nathan said. "And she has chosen. She does not want you. Can you not understand that? Can you not accept her decision and let her be?" Chester stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "She does not know what she wants. She has been led astray, corrupted by this place and by people like you. I am trying to save her from making the biggest mistake of her life. The biggest mistake of her life would be marrying a man who does not respect her enough to accept her refusal," Nathan said. "You claim to care for her, but everything you have done since arriving here has been about your own wounded pride, not about Willa's happiness or well-being." For a moment, something ugly flickered across Chester's face. Then it was gone, replaced by cold disdain. "You think you have won," he said quietly. "But this is not over, not until I say it is." "It is over," Nathan said firmly. "And if you try anything else, anything at all, you will answer to me, not as a lawman, but as a man protecting someone he loves. Do you understand what I'm saying?" They stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut. Then Chester laughed, a sound devoid of amusement. "You love her? How quaint. And does she love you, do you think? Or is she simply grateful for your protection, using you until something better comes along?" Nathan refused to be baited. "What Willa and I have is none of your concern. Leave town, Chester. There is nothing for you here but more disappointment." He turned and walked out without waiting for a response. But he could feel Chester's eyes boring into his back, and the threat in the air was palpable. That evening, Nathan asked Willa to walk with him after dinner. They followed a path that led away from the ranch house toward a rise that overlooked the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. It was beautiful, the kind of beauty that made a person grateful to be alive. At the top of the rise, Nathan stopped and turned to face Willa. He took both her hands in his heart pounding so hard he was sure she must be able to hear it. "I spoke to Chester today," he said. "I asked him to leave town. I do not know if he will, but I wanted him to understand that his presence here is not welcome, that you have made your choice." "Thank you," Willa said softly. "I know it must have been difficult." "It was not difficult," Nathan said. "What would be difficult is watching you suffer from his harassment and doing nothing about it." He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "Willa, I know we have not been courting long, only a couple of months. But I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you care about your students. I love how you think deeply about things, how you are not afraid to have opinions, even unpopular ones. I love the sound of your laugh and the way you look at me like I am someone worth knowing." Willa's eyes were shining with tears. "Nathan, I love you too. So much it frightens me sometimes." "Then marry me," Nathan said. the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know I cannot offer you the life you had in Boston. I am just a ranch hand with more dreams than money. But I will work hard every day to make you happy, to give you the life you deserve. Say yes, Willa. Please say yes." "Yes," Willa said, tears spilling over now. "Yes, Nathan, I will marry you. I do not want the life I had in Boston. I want this life, here, with you. That is all I want." Nathan pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and it was like coming home after a long journey. Willa kissed him back, her hands coming up to cup his face, and for that moment, the world consisted only of the two of them and the love building between them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I do not have a ring yet," he admitted, "but I will get you one, the best one I can afford." "I do not need a ring," Willa said. "I just need you." They walked back to the ranch house hand in hand, and when they told the Reynolds their news, Mrs. Reynolds burst into happy tears and insisted on opening a bottle of wine she had been saving for a special occasion. Mr. Reynolds shook Nathan's hand firmly and welcomed Willa to their family. "You will need a place to live," Mr. Reynolds said practically. "There is that old cabin on the north section of the property. It needs work, but the structure is sound. If you want it, Nathan, it is yours. Consider it a wedding present." Nathan was overwhelmed by the generosity. "Sir, I cannot accept such a gift." "You can and you will," Mr. Reynolds said firmly. "You have worked for me loyally for 3 years. You are like a son to us, and Willa is already like a daughter. It would make us happy to see you settled nearby." Plans were made rapidly. They would marry in 3 weeks, giving time for Nathan to make the cabin habitable and for Willa to finish out the current school term. The ceremony would be simple, held at the church in Alta with the whole town invited. But first, they had to deal with Chester. His reaction to the news of their engagement was swift and vicious. He confronted Willa in front of the general store, his face red with rage. "You are making the biggest mistake of your life," he hissed. "Marrying some nobody cowboy instead of accepting what I offered you. You will regret this, Willa. I promise you that." "The only thing I regret is ever giving you the time of day in Boston," Willa said coldly. "Now leave me alone, Chester. I am engaged to be married, and nothing you say or do will change that." "We will see about that," Chester said. And there was something in his eyes that sent a chill through Willa. That night, 2 things happened. First, someone cut the fence on the Reynolds ranch, and 50 head of cattle wandered off before being discovered missing. Second, Willa's horse, which she had finally recovered after it threw her into the river, was found dead in its stall, its throat cut. The sheriff was called for both incidents. The evidence pointed toward deliberate sabotage and cruelty, but there was no proof connecting Chester to either crime. He had, once again, been at the saloon with witnesses during the relevant times, but Nathan knew in his bones that Chester was behind both acts, even if he had hired others to do the actual dirty work. The harassment was escalating, becoming more dangerous. "He is trying to scare us," Willa said that night, her voice tight with suppressed fury, "trying to make us too afraid to go through with the wedding." "It is not going to work," Nathan said grimly. "We are getting married as planned, and then Chester Hadley can go straight to hell for all I care." The 3 weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and tension. Nathan worked on the cabin every spare moment, repairing the roof and chinkling the walls and building furniture from rough lumber. Willa continued teaching, determined not to let Chester's harassment disrupt her students' education. And the Reynolds family stood firmly behind them both, making it clear to the entire community that Willa and Nathan had their support. The night before the wedding, Chester made one last attempt. He came to the Reynolds ranch after dark and demanded to speak to Willa. Mr. Reynolds met him at the door with a shotgun and told him in no uncertain terms to leave the property immediately. "She is making a mistake," Chester insisted. "I am only trying to help her see reason." "The only mistake Miss Everett ever made regarding you was being polite when she first met you," Mr. Reynolds said coldly. "Now, get off my land before I have you arrested for trespassing." Chester left, but not before shooting a look of pure hatred toward the house where Willa stood, watching from a window. She shivered despite the warmth of the room. "He is not going to stop," she said to Nathan, who had come to stand beside her. "Even after we are married, he is going to keep trying to hurt us." "Then we will deal with it together," Nathan said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I am not afraid of Chester Hadley, and I am not going to let him ruin our happiness." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, a perfect morning in June 1878. The church was packed with townspeople, all there to celebrate the marriage of the schoolteacher and the cowboy. Willa wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Reynolds had helped her make, with wildflowers woven into her hair. Nathan wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed, his hair combed neatly. As Willa walked down the aisle on Mr. Reynolds' arm, Nathan thought his heart might burst from the sheer joy of seeing her. She was so beautiful it hurt to look at her, but more than that, she was his partner, his love, his future. They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed Willa with a reverence that brought tears to more than a few eyes in the congregation. The reception was held at the Reynolds Ranch, with tables set up outside and more food than seemed possible. There was music and dancing, laughter and toasts. Willa danced with Nathan, with Mr. Reynolds, with the sheriff and the minister, and several of her students' fathers. Nathan found himself shaking more hands than he could count, accepting congratulations and well wishes. Chester was conspicuously absent from the celebration, and for that, everyone was grateful. Perhaps he had finally given up. Perhaps he had left town. They could only hope. As the sun set and the party wound down, Nathan and Willa slipped away to the cabin that was now their home. Nathan carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, giddy with happiness and relief that the day had gone so perfectly. The cabin was small but cozy, with a fireplace that Nathan had rebuilt himself, a sturdy bed with a quilt Mrs. Reynolds had given them, a table and chairs, and shelves waiting to be filled with Willa's books. It was not much, but it was theirs. That night, in the privacy of their new home, they came together as husband and wife with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless. Afterwards, lying in Nathan's arms, Willa felt a peace she had not known since before Chester had ever entered her life. Here, with this man, she was safe. She was loved. She was home. But their peace was shattered 3 days later. Nathan had ridden out to check on cattle in the far pastures, and Willa was alone in the cabin when she heard a horse approach. She went to the door, expecting one of the ranch hands, and froze. Chester sat on his horse in front of the cabin, and in his hand was a revolver pointed directly at her. "Hello, Willa," he said, his voice eerily calm. "I think it is time we had a final conversation." Willa's heart was pounding, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Chester, whatever you were planning, it will not end well for you. Nathan will be back soon." "Nathan is miles away," Chester said. "I made sure of that. We have plenty of time to talk. Come out here, Willa. Do not make me come in there after you." Willa considered slamming the door and barricading herself inside, but she could see the wildness in Chester's eyes, the barely controlled rage. He was past reason, past sanity. If she refused, he might simply shoot through the door. She stepped out onto the small porch, her mind racing. If she could keep him talking, buy time, maybe Nathan would return. Maybe someone from the ranch would happen by. "What do you want, Chester?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I want you to understand," Chester said, dismounting but keeping the gun trained on her. "I want you to understand what you have done. I offered you everything, wealth, position, a place in Boston society, and you threw it all away for this." He gestured dismissively at the cabin, at the ranch spread out around them. "For a nobody cowboy and a life of poverty in the middle of nowhere." "I chose love," Willa said quietly. "I chose happiness. Something you could never have given me, Chester, because you do not know what love actually means. You think love is possession, control, but real love is freedom. It is choosing to be with someone every day, not because you have to, but because you want to." "Freedom!" Chester spat the word like a curse. "You had freedom in Boston. You had a future. I would have given you the world." "You would have put me in a gilded cage," Willa said. "And when I refused, you could not accept it. Your pride was wounded. So you followed me across the country to punish me. You burned down the schoolhouse, killed my horse, terrorized me for weeks. Is that love, Chester? Is that what you call caring for someone?" "I had to make you see," Chester said, and now there were tears in his eyes, his hand shaking where he held the gun. "I had to make you understand that you cannot reject me, that you are mine, you have always been mine. I am not yours, Willa said firmly. I am my own person, and I have chosen to share my life with Nathan because he sees me as an equal, as a partner, not as property to be owned. Chester's face crumpled, and for a moment, Willa thought he might lower the gun. But then his expression hardened again, became cold and determined. If I cannot have you, then he cannot either. I will make you a widow, Willa. I will take away everything you love, just as you took away everything I wanted. He raised the gun, aiming now toward the path that led back to the main ranch, where Nathan would appear when he returned. And Willa realized with horrible clarity what Chester intended. He was going to wait for Nathan and shoot him when he arrived. He was going to make her watch her husband die. No, Willa said, and without thinking, she launched herself off the porch toward Chester. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the quiet afternoon. But Willa's rush had thrown off Chester's aim, and the bullet went wide. They struggled for the weapon, Chester stronger, but Willa fighting with the desperation of someone who had everything to lose. The gun went off again, and this time the bullet hit something. Chester stumbled backward, a look of surprise crossing his face. Blood bloomed across his shirt, spreading rapidly. He looked down at the wound, then up at Willa, confusion in his eyes. "You shot me," he said, sounding almost bewildered. "You shot yourself," Willa said, her voice shaking. "When we struggled." Chester sank to his knees, the gun falling from his hand. "This is not how it was supposed to end," he said, his voice fading. "You were supposed to be mine." "I was never yours," Willa said, and despite everything, there was sadness in her voice. "Goodbye, Chester." He fell forward, his body going still. Willa stood there, shaking, unable to quite process what had just happened. The sound of rapidly approaching hoofbeats broke through her shock, and then Nathan was there, leaping from his horse before it had fully stopped. "Willa!" He took in the scene in an instant, Chester's body, the gun, Willa standing there with blood on her hands. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "He came to kill you," Willa said, her voice distant. "He said he would make me a widow. We fought for the gun, and it went off. Nathan, I think I killed him." Nathan pulled her into his arms, holding her tight while she shook. "You defended yourself. You defended us. That is not murder, Willa. That is survival." Mr. Reynolds arrived moments later, having heard the gunshots from the main house. Then the sheriff, summoned by one of the ranch hands. They examined the scene, took statements, and concluded that Chester Hadley's death had been self-defense during an assault. There would be no charges filed against Willa. Chester's body was buried in Alta's small cemetery, his grave marked with a simple wooden cross. There was no family to claim him, no friends to mourn him. He had died alone, consumed by an obsession he could not let go. In the weeks that followed, Willa struggled with what had happened. She had nightmares of the struggle, of the gun going off, of the look in Chester's eyes as he died. Nathan held her through the dark nights, let her talk through her feelings, and slowly the nightmares began to fade. The new schoolhouse was completed in August, a sturdy building paid for by community donations and a generous contribution from the Reynolds family. Willa returned to teaching, throwing herself into her work with renewed dedication. The children welcomed her back with homemade cards and wildflowers, and slowly life began to feel normal again. Nathan worked on the cabin, adding rooms as he could afford the lumber, making it into a real home. He built Willa bookshelves for her growing collection and a desk where she could prepare her lessons. She planted a garden outside the door, herbs and flowers and vegetables, watching them grow and feeling like she was putting down roots. On a crisp October evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Willa told Nathan she was pregnant. They were going to have a baby in the spring. The joy on Nathan's face was something Willa knew she would remember for the rest of her life. He pulled her into his arms and held her gently, as if she might break, though she laughed and told him she was not that fragile. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." Their son was born in April of 1879, exactly 1 year after Willa had fallen into the river and Nathan had pulled her out. They named him William after Willa's father, with the middle name Nathan insisted upon being Everett to honor Willa's family. He was a healthy, squalling infant with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. Mrs. Reynolds fussed over the baby like he was her own grandchild, knitting him blankets and sweaters, teaching Willa the ins and outs of motherhood. Mr. Reynolds carved wooden toys for his cradle, smiled benevolently when Nathan walked around in an exhausted daze from sleepless nights. Willa continued teaching, bringing baby William with her to the schoolhouse when he was small. The students loved having a baby in the classroom, taking turns gently rocking his cradle when he fussed. As he grew, he became a fixture at the school, learning his letters almost before he could walk, surrounded by the warmth of community. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Sarah Margaret, named for both their mothers. She was a fierce, independent child from the start, with Nathan's determination and Willa's quick mind. Then came another son, James, and finally another daughter, Catherine, completing their family. The cabin grew with them, rooms added one by one as Nathan's skills and their savings increased. What had started as a rough one-room structure became a comfortable home filled with laughter and life, bookshelves overflowing, toys scattered across the floor, the constant happy chaos of children growing up. Nathan eventually became foreman of the Reynolds Ranch when the previous foreman retired. The increased salary allowed them greater security, the ability to save for their children's futures. But Nathan never forgot where he had come from, never lost his essential humility and kindness. Willa taught for 25 years, influencing generations of children in Alta. She established the lending library she had dreamed of, filling it with books donated from across the territory. She fought for better education, for equal opportunities for girls as well as boys, for fair treatment of all students regardless of their family's social standing or financial situation. She became a pillar of the community, respected and beloved. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Nathan took Willa back to the spot by the river, where he had pulled her from the water all those years ago. They stood on the bank, their hair now threaded with silver, their hands still clasped together as they had been so many times before. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathan asked. "Choosing this life instead of the one you could have had in Boston?" Willa looked at him, at the face she had loved for a quarter century, and smiled. "Not for a single moment. This is the life I was meant to have. You are the person I was meant to find. Everything that happened, as difficult as it was, led me here, to you, to our children, to our home. How could I regret any of that?" Nathan pulled her close, resting his chin on the top of her head. "I love you, Willa Xerxes. I have loved you since the moment I saw you shaking in that soaked dress by the river. And I wrapped you around my heart as surely as you wrapped your coat around my shoulders that day," Willa said softly. "I love you, Nathan. Always." They stood there as the sun set, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life together through love and determination and the simple choice to keep choosing each other, day after day, year after year. Their children grew and had families of their own. William became a teacher like his mother, carrying on her legacy of education in a new generation. Sarah married a rancher and proved to be as capable at running a ranch as any man, earning respect throughout the territory. James became a lawyer, fighting for justice and fair treatment under the law. Catherine followed her father's love of horses and became known throughout Utah for her skill in training them. Nathan and Willa grew old together, their love deepening rather than fading with the passage of years. They were fixtures in Alta, the story of how they met becoming something of a local legend. The cowboy who had jumped into a raging river to save the schoolteacher. The love that had survived obsession and violence to bloom into something beautiful and lasting. On a warm evening in June of 1923, 45 years after they had married, Nathan Xerxes passed away peacefully in his sleep, Willa's hand in his. He was 71 years old and had lived a good life, full of love and purpose and meaning. Willa mourned him deeply but without bitterness, grateful for every day they had been given together. She lived another 5 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, telling stories of the early days in Alta, of the wild and wonderful West she had known. She spoke often of Nathan, keeping his memory alive, not with sadness, but with joy, celebrating the love they had shared. Willa Xerxes died in her sleep on a spring morning in 1928, at the age of 73. Her family found her with a peaceful smile on her face, as if she had been dreaming of something wonderful. In her hand was a faded photograph of Nathan, young and strong, taken not long after they had married. They buried her next to Nathan in the Alta Cemetery, under the shade of a cottonwood tree that had grown tall over the years. Their shared headstone bore a simple inscription: Nathan and Willa Xerxes, beloved partners in life and love, together always. And on spring days when the river runs high with snowmelt, when the sun shines bright on the mountains and wildflowers bloom in the meadows, people in Alta still tell the story of the cowboy and the schoolteacher, of love found in the most unlikely of circumstances, of a coat wrapped around shaking shoulders that led to a lifetime of warmth. It is a story of survival and choice, of fighting for happiness and building a life together, one day at a time. It is a love story, pure and simple, the kind that endures long after the people who lived it have passed into memory, inspiring new generations to believe that true love, when you find it, is worth fighting for.